Good evening and welcome to the third RCPath book club. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's great to see so many of us here tonight, and I can't say I'm surprised as we have the wonderful Mary Roach with us here to discuss her book entitled Gulp, Travels Around the Gut, or if you're not in the UK, it's known as Gulp, Adventures in the Alimentary Canal. My name is Jade Macklin. I'm a biomedical scientist currently training in gastrointestinal histopathology reporting at the Royal Free Hospital in London, where I'm also an advanced practitioner specializing in the dissection of gastrointestinal and hepatobiliary specimens. I have two sons who have very much enjoyed the gory stories and the hilarious facts that I've been telling them whilst reading the book, and a husband who almost faints at the sight of blood. So I've been carefully choosing which excerpts to share with him. I like writing and playing music, and I love reading non-fiction books. So this was particularly fascinating because, you know, despite spending most of my day learning about the GI tract, I found so many unusual and interesting avenues to take, thanks to Mary's endless curiosity. As most of you will know, we are tying this in with Bowel Cancer Awareness Month, which is this month, April. And what better way to help break the taboo of discussing our disgusting but fascinating insides than with the author of All Things Weird and Wonderful, Mary Roach. Mary is the author of not one, but 6 New York Times bestsellers, including Stiff, The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers, Packing for Mars, and her most recent book, Grunt, The Curious Science of Humans at War. The book we'll be discussing today, Gulp, was published in 2013 and is an international bestseller, having been translated into 17 languages. It was shortlisted for the 2014 Royal Society Winton Prize for Science Books and is described in the New York Times. Gulp is far and away her funniest and most sparkling book, a vastly entertaining pilgrimage down the digestive tract with Roach as the wittiest, most valuable tour guide imaginable. Here to discuss the book with Mary and I, we have 2 wonderful panelists, Dr. Eamon McCarron and Genevieve Bent. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Oh, hello, my name is Dr. Eamon McCarron. I'm a chemical pathology and metabolic medicine trainee in Northern Ireland. I'm also on the RCPath Regional Council here as the trainee rep. My day job involves treating and researching patients with inherited cholesterol disorders at high cardiovascular risk, and I'm also interested in dietary patterns. Interesting fact is I'm also a classically trained pianist and cellist.
Thanks, Eamon.
Evening, everyone. My name is Genevieve Bent. I am a science teacher by profession. I currently work in a secondary school in South London teaching 16 to 18-year-olds. I'm an associate assistant principal, so I head up sixth form, and I'm a head of science as well, leading a large team of science teachers. I am really happy to be here. I love reading fiction and of course non-fiction. So really enjoyed reading Gulp and looking forward to the discussion tonight.
Fantastic, thank you. So just a quick word about the format for tonight. We'll start with a reading from Mary, followed by a discussion with the panelists, and then finish up with questions from the audience. Some housekeeping points. The event is being recorded and will be available on the RCPath YouTube channel. If you are a Twitter fan, please do tweet about the event using the Twitter handles @RCPath and #RCPathBookClub. We'd really love to hear some questions and comments from the audience. These can be for Mary or the panelists, so you can add these on the Q&A section, and we'll get to these after the panel discussion. Okay, so time to hand over to Mary, who's joining us all the way from California. A very big welcome, Mary, and we look forward to hearing your reading. Hang on a second, I think you're still on mute. There you go.
Yeah, sorry. Technical gaffe number 1. Okay, so anyway, sorry. And so, yeah, I'm going to be reading a short excerpt from the book. I've chosen this just because it's kind of a, well, just because I like it, and it's not too overly specific, and I don't really have to get anyone up to speed. There's one doctor mentioned here. He's someone I was just visiting. He's involved in the early research on fecal transplants or microbiome transplants, whatever you want to call them. Anyway, so that's who Dr. Koruts is, and when I refer to him, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, so I'll begin. The great irony is that in the beginning, the gut was all there was. We're basically a highly evolved earthworm surrounding the intestinal tract, Koruts commented as we drove away from his clinic the last day I was there. Eventually, the food processor had to have a brain attached to help it look for food and limbs to reach that food. That increased its size, so it needed a circulatory system to distribute the fuel that powered the limbs, and so on. Even now, the digestive tract has its own immune system and its own primitive brain, the enteric nervous system. I recalled what Ton Van Vliet had said at one point in our conversation. People are surprised to learn they are a big pipe with a little bit around it. You are what you eat, but more than that, you are how you eat. Be thankful you're not a sea anemone disgorging lunch through the same hole that the dinner goes in. Be glad you're not a grazer or a cud chewer spending your life stoking the furnace. Be thankful for digestive juices and enzymes, for villi, for fire and cooking, all the miracles that have made us what we are. Koruts gave the example of the gorilla, a fellow ape held back by the energy demands of a less streamlined gut. Like the cow, the gorilla lives by fermenting vast quantities of crude vegetation. He's processing leaves all day, just chewing and sitting and cooking inside. There's no room for great thoughts. Those who know the human gut intimately see beauty, not only in its sophistication, but in its inner landscapes and architecture. In a 1998 issue of the New England Journal of Medicine, 2 Spanish physicians published a pair of photographs they called the haustrations of the transverse colon. Side by side were the arches of an upper floor arcade in Gaudi's La Pedrera. Inspired and wanting to see my own internal Gaudi, I had my first colonoscopy without drugs. There is an unnameable feeling I have had maybe 10 times in my life. It is a mix of wonder, privilege, humility, and awe that borders on fear. I have felt it in a field of snow on the outskirts of Fairbanks, Alaska, with the northern lights whipping overhead so seemingly close I dropped to my knees. I am walloped by it on dark nights in the mountains, looking up at the sparkling smear of our galaxy. Laying eyes on my own ileocecal valve, peering into my appendix from within, bearing witness to the magnificent complexity of the human body, I felt, let's be honest, mild to moderate cramping. But you understand what I'm getting at here. Most of us pass our lives never once laying eyes on our own organs, the most precious and amazing things we own. Until something goes wrong, we barely give them thought. This seems strange to me. How is it that we find Christina Aguilera more interesting than the inside of our own bodies? It is, of course, possible that I seem strange. You may be thinking, wow, that Mary Roach has her head up her ass. To which I say, only briefly and with the utmost respect.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. Yeah, I loved the ending of the book. You just did, yeah, such a good job. You sort of, yeah, I've actually found it a little bit quite moving when I did read it. You just sort of, yeah, capturing the wonder and the awe and, you know, the complexity of our insides, and, you know, how lucky we are to have evolved this way. And I think, yeah, something that, you know, many of us working in science and medicine and research or, you know, related fields, you know, we do feel that, but can sort of tend to forget, you know, because we're just, you know, for me, day to day, I'm seeing these organs, you know, every day and looking down the microscope, but it's sort of from the angle, you know, of what's wrong, and what's the diagnosis, and how can we fix it, and how can we help the patient, of course. So yeah, it was really nice to just take a step back and think about the gut sort of, humbly working away and, doing its thing while we kind of go about our daily business. And then while I was thinking about that, I remembered the word from an earlier chapter, which was borborygmi. So it's the normal sounds that your gut makes, the sort of rumbling and gurgling. And there was a brilliant chapter where you talked about some patients from like the late 1800s or something like that, who were convinced that they had, snakes and frogs and creatures living inside their guts, and even went so far as to have surgery, I think, some of them. But it turns out it was just the normal borborygmi of the gut. So yeah, I think your writing sort of, you had me looking up that word and how to pronounce it, and sort of going down all these various avenues, stories that I was Googling, and just found so much, so many unusual and interesting facts from your reading, and it sort of sends you down all these rabbit holes. And the other thing I want to say about that reading was just the way you sort of so poetically and described your colonoscopy. I thought, if we could inspire people to think that way, then we might have really much higher participation rates in screening. And I sort of, read it and thought, oh, I almost look forward to my first colonoscopy. I really loved it. Thank you. And over to Eamon and Genevieve, what did you think about the last couple of pages of the book?
Yeah, I agree. It really kind of sums up for me what the whole book is about, which is, we shouldn't be afraid to talk about these things. We should embrace it more, and we should, if we do have symptoms of disease, or because it's Bowel Cancer Awareness Month, if we do have bowel symptoms, we need to be more comfortable and less fearful about talking about them. And we really need to encourage, that's not just among our friends and families, but for doctors as well. We should be encouraging patients, to feel that sense of fearlessness when talking about it. But I loved as well how you described the colonoscopy and the cramps. And and I suppose technically you did have your head in your ass, like when you wanted. But no, it was really good. I really loved the whole book, Mary. It was so good.
Thank you.
Again, just to summarize what Eamon and Jade said, it is the final chapter and the final few pages where it just summarized everything that you'd read, but put it so beautifully. And it really put into perspective the fact that we don't think about our organs and our organ systems until something is wrong. We will go to the doctors and we'll worry about this, but once we feel fine, we put it to the back of our minds, and actually our body's working super hard to keep us alive and to keep us functioning all the time, and we pretty much take it for granted. It really just sort of summed up the journey that the book made and the journey that you made as a reader.
Yeah, totally. It was a brilliant ending. And what you were saying about Genevieve, and how we don't sort of think about food after we've swallowed it, and most people but we spend so much time people spend so much time thinking about cooking, and cooking shows are so popular, and nowadays people take photos of their food all the time, and we spend, obviously food is such a huge part of our lives, but I think people just don't, or they don't want to think about what happens after they've chewed and swallowed. So Mary, what made you think that that this would be a good topic to write about, and then and how did you decide which parts to focus on as well?
Yeah, that was part of my decision. You mentioned there's so much emphasis on food and cooking, and there's almost like in this country sort of a national obsession with food, and I just thought once it hits the mouth, that's when it gets interesting to me. Like I think you all should be posting pictures on social media of like world bolus rolling and like, you know, or I don't know, pictures from your colonoscopy, like taking pills from inside. That would be so much more interesting than, I don't know, the latest dish that you just ordered at the latest hip restaurant. But I'm a little weird that way.
Hey, I understand. I think it's.
So it was partly that. I just felt like, you know, like you are all saying, it's that people just take for granted their own insides, and people have, and also I think especially in this country, there's this idea that science is boring, and I'm like, science is your body, science is your world, science is your computer, the trees outside, your guts. That's science. How could that be boring? So I kind of want to just make a book that I wanted to just make it fun and interesting, and pull people in who actually don't think they're interested in science. I want them to read and discover and again also to feel more comfortable talking about what's going on inside them in case something's gone wrong, and they, you know, so they can just call up their doctor and say, look, my shit looks really weird. What, you know, what, it's like, say it.
Hey, everyone, come have a look.
I have to ask you about, I'll just jump in, just when you say about taking pictures of, you know, the food bolus. For me, I thought one of the things in the book was about, is it GW, the guy with Hirschsprungs and the big colon?
Oh, the megacolon.
And I have this in a museum and people go and see it. I thought, and then, yeah. So just tell us more about it. Like, you know, so is it just on public display? And
that was crazy. I actually looked that up online.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. There's this museum in Philadelphia, the College of Physicians, I think it is, but it's called the Mutter Museum, M-U-T-T-E-R. And it's this, it's a museum, kind of a medical oddities. It's quite fascinating, but kind of the showpiece. I mean, it's literally in a glass case, a beautiful sort of antique looking, and it's huge. I mean, it's as big around my waist. It's a megacolon. It's you know, well lit, and people. It's kind of like a shrine. People, it's this poor man. I mean, colon is it's a problem with the nerves at the lower end of the digestive tract. Stuff's not moving along the way it's meant to, and the whole bowel stretches out and becomes clogged often, and you know, and he died of it. It's quite a sad story, but it is an amazing sight, and people kind of marvel at it. So anytime you're in Philadelphia, I highly recommend.
I'm gonna look that one up. Yeah,
to the megacolon, and you can buy. I have a little stuffed megacolon that they sell in the gift shop.
I can't wait to sell that one to my partner. We're gonna go and see a really big colon.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, I've actually seen the Hirschsprungs, you know, well, I think once a case. Yeah. So you're just looking out for the ganglion cells and the nerve cells, and they're just, they're not there. So it can't sort of perform the peristalsis and move everything through. But, you know, luckily now they just sort of take out that part of the colon and sew the other ends back together. And, you know, luckily we've come a long way since.
Yeah.
Since then, I guess.
I was going to say, I found out at the Mutter Museum, or shortly after, that that Elvis Presley had a megacolon, and so that led to the chapter where I actually visited with his physician from back in the day.
Yes, so tell us.
Yeah. And he had the pictures, Dr. Nick. He had the pictures of the colon as well.
Oh, Dr. Nick, no, he was amazing. He passed away shortly after the book came out, but he was in his 80s at that point. And anyway, well, we can get into that later. But
no, go for it. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, no, he because Elvis Presley had at the time, not that much was known about Hirschsprungs, and he wasn't diagnosed, so he didn't have the surgery, so he was relying on enemas, which and the time he'd have to time the enema with when he's on stage, and he was having to wear, basically depends, and it was a really sad story. He had bowel trouble all through his life, and hadn't really obviously told the fans about it, or and even his wife was didn't seem to know about it, and Dr. Nick had been blamed for his death because Dr. Nick did prescribe a tremendous amount of medical drugs, basically drugs, and he was blamed for Elvis's death. So Dr. Nick was very excited to talk about megacolon and the fact that this had contributed to a lot of the problems Elvis had had. And anyway, I went to visit him in his home, which Elvis had purchased for him back in the day.
Wow.
Yeah. So, made a little trip to Graceland.
Yeah, must have met so many. Yeah, you just clearly meet so many interesting people with your writing.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I think they didn't know about it. Is that right back then, or?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so yeah.
Right.
So yeah. So just like that, this book, there was the science. So I mean, I guess you're first and foremost a science, even though it's so fun, so entertaining, and you've got all the kind of history in there as well. It's first and foremost a science book, and there was so many facts I didn't know. I started sort of I was telling the others that I started sort of marking the interesting bits and the new facts, and then there were just way too many, so so I stopped. But we have a couple. We have the taste receptors in the gut, just like in the mouth, for the 5 different tastes. I didn't know, and then the bit, I like the chapter on the nutritious value of organ meats, or variety meats they were branded as at one point. There were so many. So what about Eamon and Genevieve? Did you find, Eamon, you already know about metabolism and chemical pathology, obviously, and Genevieve, science, head of science, but was there a lot of new science that you learned from the book?
Jen, you go first.
Yeah, I mean, there was loads. I think that was what surprised me the most about reading it. There was so many facts that I just wasn't prepared for. Like Jade said, the sort of taste receptors that we found, but also I think just random pieces of information about, the chewing and teeth and crunching and the physics of eating, and there was just so many that, I started highlighting all of them at first, but like Jade, there was so many that I started to highlight. As I went through each chapter, I was highlighting the ones that I thought the students would find most interesting. I think it was just how much all of those facts just relates to the everyday person. Like you said, Mary, science, I tell this to the students all the time, science is everywhere. It's all of us, it's everything. And I think this book made it relatable in such a disgusting but really fun and enjoyable way.
I have to say, so in my part of my job is to do with diet, and we recommend diets to patients, and one of the parts in the books that I found most amusing and quite interesting was to do with nutri-enemas, which is something I hadn't come across before, and I can't believe it's something that is extensively being researched. And it was fascinating. I can't believe people actually were researching, the benefits of doing that.
Yeah, that was a surprise to me as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that I actually found I think it was President Garfield, U.S. President Garfield who was sort of the famous patient to receive nutrient enemas. I think it was after a gunshot wound. Anyway, he couldn't take it in this way. Mm-hmm. This eating in reverse, basically. And there was actually a cookbook of recipes for things that, but not really like high cuisine, but like what can you absorb that way, because it's not as efficient a way of eating, obviously. There are some things some important nutrients that could be absorbed that way that could keep someone alive for a while, but it was it's not a pleasant way to take in your nutrients. But I had no idea. Just the fact that there was somebody had put together this is, from it's 100 years ago. It's not, you can't buy this cookbook now.
Yeah.
But that kind of thing, I just love to go down those rabbit holes and see what I find. That was fascinating. Yeah.
And then on from that, there was like talk about like exorcisms, putting holy water in the rectum and stuff as well. It was just
yeah. And there was a whole discussion of if you've given up, what was it? If you're fasting. Lent, If you're fasting for Lent,
can you
take nutrients up the rear passage? Have you violated your fast? I was like, what?
Sometimes in the hospital, certain drugs we can give through the rectum, but I don't use that often. But yeah, it's interesting, like just thinking about it. Yeah, certainly I won't be recommending patients do that. Out of a diet.
I also thought the part about the salivating room, where they used to have mercury being fed inhaled by the patients, not knowing that actually mercury was poisoning them, and salivating was a side effect of that. And I just thought, wow, like these are things, although you train as a scientist or a science teacher or a doctor, these are things that you wouldn't really come across unless you really took a deep dive into this world, which I loved.
Definitely.
Yeah, the saliva. There's a whole saliva chapter, and that was. I didn't start out thinking I'm going to have a whole saliva chapter, but I found this woman who, this is her world, this is her life, or it was at the time, and I thought I have to meet a woman whose entire 9-to-5 existence revolves around spit. And so I went there, and not only is she amazing, she's like incredibly beautiful and fashionable, and I'm like, that just was such a disconnect for me. I just wasn't anticipating that the saliva researcher would be this Italian woman. But yeah, so that led me down, many salivary rabbits that were fascinating. Yeah.
Is that
for spit now?
Is it the people? I was going to ask actually next. So is it the people? You definitely comes across in your writing. How much sort of fondness you have for the characters, and your respect for their sort of the passion that the scientists have, and the ones that you sort of interview now, and also the ones from the past. And I was just going to ask that actually, sort of whether you're inspired by the people more or the science.
I think I can't really separate it. I think what I'm fascinated by is the people and the way the science has kind of consumed them and created who they are. So it's the people, but also the people as affected by what they study, and how thoroughly immersed in it and fascinated by it they are. I love that kind of, it's almost obsession, but not, that sounds like it's unhealthy. It's just extreme enthusiasm for something that the rest of us never give thought to. And that's one thing I love about all branches of science, really. It's just how someone can just become kind of enlivened by it, and end up discovering things and helping the world, but through this initial kind of curiosity and enthusiasm for something that you would think, it's saliva.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, saliva is really amazing. It's amazing. I mean, I won't go on my whole saliva thing here, but it is a really amazing substance.
Yeah. And now we all go to our friends and family and start trying to talk about saliva to them. And they just look at us.
Like there's two kinds, and there's the stimulated and the unstimulated.
Yeah.
Properties. It's so amazing, and it heals wounds.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yes. So one of the really interesting parts was thinking about all the fads and the sort of medical pseudoscience, and There was like the Fletcherism, which was the belief that, you know, the more that you chew, the more nutrients you'll absorb, and the auto-intoxication that, you know, led to that. Yeah, the JBL colonic irrigation cascade device or something, I think it was.
JBL stands for Joy, Beauty, Life.
Yes.
Really a sit-upon enema bag that they call Joy, Beauty, Life. But yes, yeah, the fads were really, and both of those fads exist today in one form or another.
Yeah.
They're very persistent, those beliefs. That's another thing I try to do with books, is to steer people away from these erroneous beliefs. It's kind of a tough job, but I do like to try to expose some of those things and why they're not what they are claimed to be. I mean, the Fletcherism, the extremely thorough chewing, you don't hear much about Fletcherism anymore, but what you have instead is people who believe that you should blenderize all your food.
Yeah, of course.
It's like disrespecting the stomach. The stomach is really good at breaking stuff down to a form that you can then, sort of a liquidy form that you can then, that your small intestine will be able to absorb from. So you don't need to chew a shallot 700 times, which is one of Fletcher's examples. I mean, you got better things to do.
Yeah. It's fascinating how far it spread, you know, and he just influenced so many. Yeah, I think he sort of he just made friends with, you know, with scientists and with doctors and influential people, and just managed to make it sort of spread so far.
And politicians. I mean, it was a matter of national policy. I mean, and foreign policy. It just, anyway, bizarre, incredible. I mean, he had friends in high places, and he was a very persuasive, almost like a preacher.
Yeah.
It was kind of a cult in a sense. I mean, Franz Kafka was a Fletcherizer. I mean, it was just fascinating. And what was amazing is that his papers exist at Harvard, in this library at Harvard. Although he did not go to Harvard, but he left his papers to Harvard, kind of like, so now everybody thinks he went to Harvard.
Yeah.
That just reading his letters and the way, you know, he was basically an advocate of efficiency, like don't waste anything. And it's wasteful not to chew thoroughly. And you would look at his papers, and they were typed with no margins and on both sides. Like he didn't want to waste paper. I'm like, you jerk, I can barely read your. He was such an efficiency buff. I mean, and I love I love going to archives and just being able to extract little sort of tidbits about a person from how they've written, what kind of paper they used, how messy things are. It's just, to me, a little glimpse into their lives now that they're gone. I mean, I couldn't interview Dr.
Yeah, you describe it so well. Yeah. You really describe it really well. And yeah, for anyone who hasn't read it, yeah, Mary just sort of is very descriptive with all the characters. So just do read it if you haven't read it. I should say, so for those who didn't, the Fletcherism was for anyone who didn't read it, it was sort of touted as this, basically, Horace Fletcher, wasn't it, who, you know, said that if you chew, was it a specific number of times? I can't remember, or something, you know, at least 80 times or something, you know, that it will sort of, you know, make you look young again. And, you know, it's sort of, he cured anything. And this was going to be the cure for all medical ailments.
Right. And even after the war, saying, you know, in terms of how much food we need to give to our allies, to ward off starvation, you know, he tried to get Fletcherizing established as something that the whole population would do. Therefore, you don't need to give them as much food, because they'd be able to take from each bite. Therefore, cut the food rations in half. You know, it was just like, it's incredible how far he got and how high into government his beliefs went, and it became a matter of policy, and that was just amazing to me. Just amazing.
I think that's the other thing about the book. Like, what you do so well is you give us kind of a peek behind the curtain of how the process of scientific discovery works, how the fads are formed, and then how they go on to form like the zeitgeist of science and how it changes over time, you know. So it's really important. I think it's important for people to know as well, because then when you approach something new or like the pseudoscience fad, you can kind of, you know, see how that was formed or how the ideas exist.
And just to add, I think also you get to see a little bit more about where certain social trends have come from in modern times. And although you wouldn't associate, you know, the chewing to try and I guess satisfy your appetite and things like that, you wouldn't necessarily link it to Fletcherism if you hadn't read the book, but it gives you more of a background and more of a context into where current fads in terms of diet and nutrition actually sort of stem from.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, just wanted to talk about just how the humor in your books. I mean, so yeah, we've sort of discussed the science and how much we learned about the history, but it's, you know, every time you sort of talk about both of those, you always end with something funny. You know, the paragraph always sort of ends with something humorous, and you just sort of find yourself laughing out loud. And thinking about, you know, in education for you, Genevieve, you know, being head of science and as a science teacher, it seems like you know, something that kids might really respond to. And what do you think about sort of using humor to teach science and Mary's sort of style?
I mean, yeah, exactly. You know, kids really relate with things that they find funny and things that they find interesting. And personally, you know, in my chemistry A-level classes, for example, I'd love to start my lessons with memes. And I don't know if you have ever come across the chemistry cat, but chemistry cat is, they have, you know, there's lots of different memes, inorganic chemistry, organic chemistry. And I just feel like humor allows students to build the connection with content that they wouldn't necessarily, they may not enjoy or may not find the most interesting at first, but it allows them to sort of bridge the gap a little bit between their interests and what you're teaching them. And in terms of the humor, I was recommending the book to my colleagues. So I said to some of my team, you know, I think this is something that we need to read as a book club, because we have a department book club, and actually try to build that into our everyday teaching, just because it's funny, it's weird, it's interesting, it's knowledgeable. And yeah, I think it would really allow me to you know, give a greater insight into the everyday teaching and providing those stories and those characters and bringing the human anatomy to life. And yeah, I really loved the humorous part of the book. Well, throughout the book, really.
Yeah.
The book is humor. Yeah.
It's yeah, it is. Yeah. It's so funny. I mean, I guess, yeah. Those who will have read it will just know, and those who haven't, just read a couple, and you'll see what we mean. So let's see how we go. Okay, so it's 6:40. So yeah, let's have another question. So towards the end of the book, Mary, you pose a question. Does distaste slow progress in treating diseases of the bowel? Does the excretion taboo discourage research, discussion, and media attention? So yeah, this was an excellent question, and obviously it's Bowel Cancer Awareness Month, and we know that bowel cancer is the second biggest cancer killer in the UK, and we know that screening saves lives, but there's still over 40%, I think, something like that, of participants, you know, who don't participate in the screening. You know, so what are all your thoughts on how we can help sort of encourage more open discussion and have people more comfortable to talk about, you know, all that disgusting and but hilarious stuff that you talk about, Mary? Yeah, what does everyone think?
I think for me, whenever I was reading it, there's a bit of a very poignant bit when you talk about a public service ad. It's to do with anal cancer, and it's, you know, anal cancer, the cancer nobody talks about. It's kind of struck me at the time, and I was like, I can't believe, you know, and there's things we don't talk about, there's diseases we don't talk about, there's types of cancer that probably don't get the same media attention or attention as other types. And I think it's something we really need to work on. And I think it's something, again, going back to the start, you know, this idea of being fearless and not, you know, it's okay to talk about your poo and things, you know, and if you have symptoms, talking about it with friends and family. Is that something in particular you tried to get across in the book, Mary, or was it?
Yeah, I'm always encouraging people to dive into, you know, taboos, because often taboos, whether it's, you know, something's going on with your feces or whether it's something in your sex life. I mean, when you don't talk about it with your family or your friends or your doctor, more importantly, you know, you could be ignoring something really important and life-threatening. I mean, I remember reading that I think it was Farrah Fawcett died of, I believe it was anal or maybe it was rectal, but anyway.
Yeah, it was anal. You said it in the book.
And they would talk about it as, if they talked about it at all, it was cancer of the lower bowel. You know, it's and they don't, you know, those ribbons, they have colored ribbons for all the cancers. There was no ribbon. Come on, people, give them a, you know, it was, and just, yeah, it is something that I do hope that people, you know, reading the book and just like me dragging them down the intestinal, dragging them down the chute. It's like, come on, interesting. Let's talk about it. It's fascinating. I think we do ourselves a disservice by not discussing it, not just because it's important to your health, but also because it's interesting and it's our bodies, and you know, we shouldn't be ashamed or embarrassed.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've come a long way. You know, it's so much better now, and you know, there's so many brilliant campaigns now, and you know, that it's spread far and wide. And I think, you know, and even with social media and stuff, people are sort of sort of becoming more open to talk about these things. And
I definitely think people are becoming more open about it. And I think it's something we just need to keep reinforcing, and we need to keep getting that message out, you know, and even not just among health professionals, but like your friends and family, you know, talking about it, you know. I had a very personal experience, like last year, not myself, but somebody else was kind of telling me about something, and it was to do with their poo, blood in their poo, and I was kind of like, well, how long has it been going on for? And they were like, well, about a year. This is like, you know, and they were like, oh, we didn't want to, like, because I'm too embarrassed to talk to the doctor about it, or like, you know, it turned out it was okay, it was something benign, but you know, just it was shocking to think that there's a body of people out there who have symptoms like blood in their poo, and they just won't talk about it, you know.
I also think things like bladder and prostate cancer as well, particularly with, you know, high prevalence in men, and thinking about prostate cancer, particularly in my community where, you know, the prevalence in Black men in prostate cancer is high. And, you know, it's one of those things where they just continue to ignore symptoms, or it's stuff that they don't feel comfortable talking about with family or friends. And I just think books like this, and, you know, like you said, like you've all said, having those conversations and raising awareness is the only way that we can continue, you know, to make people feel comfortable. But yeah, it's, you know, bowel cancer, all of those anus cancers, you said, all of those different cancers, the more we talk about it, it's pretty much the only way we're going to help it, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you know, and the irony is that, you know, they sort of leave it, but then it just gets, you know, then that's when it progresses, and then you really can't ignore it, you know. So, you know, that's just such the sort of sad thing. And but, you know, this book, and, you know, I think using humor and in the campaigns, and, you know, and is definitely a way to sort of break the ice, because, you know, we can't help being embarrassed, and, you know, it's just sort of, you know, we've you know, we're social creatures, and we've just evolved to sort of blush when we talk about these things. So I think when you're sort of laughing, it you know, somehow you know, relaxes you. And
I thought it was interesting. You know, I ran across something called the Bristol stool chart, and initially I thought, this is bizarre, and I asked the gastroenterologist that I was visiting, I said, well, I mean, First of all, I wanted a copy of it.
Along with your
hang on my wall. But he said, no, the reason we have the Bristol stool scale, you know, it's like 1 through 7, I think. And he said it's so that patients don't have to describe their own, they can point to a chart. Like the physician can show them the chart and they can just point, because it's too embarrassing to say, well, it's kind of like a sausage, smooth and soft, you know, like little descriptions for each level. So it's kind of hilarious, but also very poignant.
Yeah.
The only way some people, you know, feel comfortable communicating about it. Yeah.
I think it's a very UK thing, like British thing as well. We're kind of a bit more reticent to talk about those things, you know, which is why we have to design charts, you know. What it looks like. Yeah.
And I love that there's international differences in the like one of them, instead of like a sausage, the description is something like linguiça or something. You know, it's a local variation on the
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that in the book, actually.
Yeah.
No, when you said the stool chart, I was pointing at the red item on your shelf that you showed us before we started. Yeah, points for anyone in the audience who can guess what that is. But
yeah, that's a made with a 3D printer. Is a 3D printed human rectum that was a gift to me from a medical imaging professional. I went to do a talk in Syracuse and he presented it to me on stage. I was, as you can imagine, pretty excited.
Yeah.
And I don't know whose rectum it is based upon. Someone's imaging, somebody's probably MRI. I don't know how they do it, but whoever he is, there he is.
He's on your shelf.
Yeah.
He's on my shelf.
They are all quite similar, actually. I can tell you that. Okay, so it's 10 to 7. Obviously, we could keep talking for so long, but we are under strict instructions not to ramble on for too long. So before we take questions from the audience, just a quick sort of last final, takeaway from the book. If, you've got it on your bookshelf and it's years later and someone comes and sort of picks it up and says, oh, is this a good book? What would you say? And Mary, what would you like readers to sort of take away from the book? Anyone? Mary, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, for myself, I would just, all the things that you guys have just been saying, any and all of that, I'll take that.
Brilliant. Eamon, last.
Yeah, just reiterating what we've already discussed, it's okay to talk about these things. If we're going to advance science, we need to understand things better and we need to be better at talking about these things. And yeah, it's just a great book. So thanks. Yeah.
For me, final word?
Yeah, for me, it would just be that science just continues to amaze me. And this is the book for everyone, not just for scientists, not just for people interested in science, but anyone who's interested in themselves and, the way that the body works. Yeah, just love it.
Okay, thank you. So it's time for audience questions. I'm just waiting for them to come through. So here comes the first one. Let's see. Colon cancer is an entity that with early detection can be curtailed. What does the panel think about the stigma that comes with taking a poo sample for screening purposes, even when it's done from the comfort of one's home? So this is sort of something we were, just touching on briefly before. I know we used to have for screening, you had to sort of take 3 different samples over time, and they've since changed it to the fecal immunochemical test, which is just a single sample. So that's, much better. But yeah, I guess what do you think about the stigma of sort of, we have the screening facilities, when it's there, but what do you think about people having to actually do it themselves at home?
Yeah, so I don't know, Mary, do you know in the UK we have a screening program where, I don't know if they have it in the US, where patients can send a stool sample in the post and it's screened for occult blood. which then might downstream lead to a camera test or a colonoscopy. But I think patients have really fixed ideas about it. They'll either engage or they won't. And those that have fixed ideas, you really have to explore it. And it's mostly to do with, the idea that they have to take a sample themselves, put it in a bottle, put an envelope, and then post it off. And when you show it and you kind of demystify it, I think people are willing to engage a bit more. I don't know what anyone else's views are on it, or if you think.
I'm not a medical professional, of course, but I think people over time have got used to doing urine samples, and that has become the norm. And I just think it's one of those things where someone needs to, become averse to it. They need to practice it. They need to feel comfortable with it. And eventually it would become a norm in the same way, you'd hope.
I had a question in that, because I remember asking my GP, my regular doctor, like colonoscopy versus the kind of test that you're talking about. I said, can you just do the test where you just look for the blood in the stool? Can you do that instead of a colonoscopy? Because for me, I would much rather smear some poo on a card than do the whole colonoscopy prep. And she said, well, what you don't, with the colonoscopy, you can detect polyps. So it seemed like there was a benefit to doing the colonoscopy, and that the fecal occult wasn't a replacement. But I think there's maybe some confusion, at least, stateside about, which is better. Can you do one and not the other, and that kind of thing. But it's interesting some people are averse to and others are okay with, like that. It's just that's interesting.
Yeah, I didn't realize that they went people just went straight for the colonoscopy, actually. Over there, I know they had the pills which you talked about, which you have the sort of capsule.
Endoscopy.
Yeah, endoscopy is a really, really brilliant sort of technology now. So, Genevieve, so it's where basically you take the pill and it just, you wear a sort of shoulder bag and it takes pictures as it goes along your GI tract, and then you sort of flush the pill away, and then you just have to hand over the camera. So I think that's a really helpful.
I had wondered whether technology. They had to give the pill back or like get it back.
I thought that briefly.
I was
okay. But yeah, and then which is because that wouldn't work, right? Obviously, no one wants to be actually checking the toilet.
Take the camera out of the toilet.
Yeah.
You don't have to do. How do they get is it like Wi-Fi? Well, how are they getting the images?
Yeah, it must be. I think it must be because it's the sort of it's sending the images somehow is kept close by on your shoulder.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right. I'm just picturing
some rays or something.
Yeah.
I don't know how the technology works, but it does capture the images.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Thing that you're on, right.
Exactly. Yeah. And I know the new fit test that we do have in the UK that replaces the old test is a lot more specific. So actually even polyps, they can detect really minute
So
in there. So even a polyp might bleed a tiny bit, and it still picks up polyps as well, actually. So.
Okay. So is that
quite sensitive?
Is that replacing colonoscopy?
It's the initial screening. So everyone, I think over, I don't know for sure, but something like, over 60 is invited to screen. And that's when you do every 2 years. Yes, you do that, just the fecal immunochemical test. You don't go for, you don't actually go and have the camera.
Yeah. And then if it's positive, it helps pick out the people who should then go on for colonoscopy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Wow,
so that's
lucky.
The first screen. And then if that's positive, then you will be sent for the colonoscopy.
Oh,
yeah.
You guys are lucky.
Yeah. Although you seem to enjoy yours, so what you said in the book.
Yeah, definitely interesting afternoon.
Yeah.
Sure. Most people get knocked out. I'm on it. It's not common to do it without drugs.
That was interesting. But in Europe, you said it's less common to have the drugs, didn't you?
Yeah, that's what I've heard. That
Yeah.
at least at the time I wrote the book, I think that there's been a trend towards more greater use of anesthesia. And I mean, here now they actually have someone on premise, like a full-blown anesthesiologist. Or so I'm thinking, like, yeah, so you can bill more. I mean, it's all healthcare system here, which is a mess, and there's a lot of inflation. So I'm not sure exactly what the causes of that are, but it seems, it's quite an extravaganza to get a colonoscopy, whereas you guys just smear some poo on a card, pop it in the mail.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Lucky us. So, okay, let me get to the next question. From Gary Ma. Hello, Gary. Every Mary Roach book is brilliant, but as someone with IBD since 1981, this landed right in my wheelhouse. Back in the day, they barely drugged you for colonoscopy. Every time it seemed surreal to see myself from the inside. What was incredibly weird for me was when they took a pinch of me for biopsy. I flinched on the gurney. The doctor asked if I felt it. I thought about it and I hadn't. Still can't explain it. But when I see them take a piece of me, I have to suppress a physical reaction. And then, by the way, when is the next book? He's also asked.
Oh yeah, that's so interesting. You don't feel it. I mean, the gut delivers the pain message when it's overstretched, when it's stretched out, because of course, if it stretches too much, it could rupture. So that's a warning system. But they can do, it's amazing. They can go in and like remove a polyp, or they do these things that you would think would be incredibly painful, and you don't feel it. You feel it when they go around the corner and they end up stretching out. That's when it hurts. But that was fascinating to me. Yeah.
And when is the next book? I have to add as well.
Yeah, the next book comes out in September, but we're doing a big cover reveal,
Ooh, okay.
So on Twitter, you'll all be inundated. If you follow me on Twitter, there'll be endless tweets about the new book, which has to do with people and wildlife, and this science of conflicts between them. So the book comes out in September, but next week, and I'm on my Twitter handle is Mary_Roach. So you'll hear all about it next week.
Oh, can't wait. People and animals. Yeah. I was thinking, I mean, once you get animals involved, there's going to be so many.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was, kind of a departure for me, because I wasn't mucking around inside the human body for once.
Yeah.
So,
and is it about people living with animals, or?
It's about human wildlife conflict. So and all the crimes, all the categories of crimes: manslaughter, murder, jaywalking deer. We have littering. Okay. So obviously you can't issue fines and tickets. What do you do? And there's a lot of conflicts in the area. Agriculture, and here we have a lot of problems with bears, and I was also overseas in India, where there's a lot of people. Surprising number of people get killed by elephants. Okay. And by leopards in parts of the Himalaya. So just kind of a roundup of different types of crimes committed by animals, and how do you deal with that? How do you prevent it? Sort of like crime prevention in the animal kingdom.
Wow, that's such an interesting angle. I love it.
Great.
Okay, so we have another question from Duha Al-Saji. Would you be interested to write a book on COVID-19 virus pathology in lay words, so people can understand the seriousness of the disease?
I think there's so many people working on that right now. According to my agent, there's like 5 major COVID books for the general lay audience coming out.
Don't do it, Mary. Don't do it.
No. I think it's best left to somebody with a background in either virology, epidemiology, or infectious diseases, because it's really complex. There's definitely topics where if you're doing a whole book on one thing like that, very focused, you almost have to have some background in it. I'm hopscotching all over the place, not really doing a comprehensive look at anything. So no, I wouldn't feel comfortable being the one to do that. But fortunately, other people have felt comfortable, and there will be a bunch of books coming out, I think, quite soon. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Excellent. So from Danny Jonick, thank you all very much for this interesting discussion. Would you be willing to comment on the different attitudes people from distinct cultures have in regard to their intestine or stool? Interesting one. I mean, you've sort of touched on that briefly, Mary, I think at one point.
To remember.
Talking about this, well, what you're talking about the Bristol stool chart and how it's named sort of different things in different countries, but
yeah, and the different.
I mean, we've
different attitudes toward whether or not you need to be knocked out for a colonoscopy. That's different globally, but you know, attitudes toward stool and your.
What about?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
What about like, you know, do you find that there's a big difference between people from the UK and people from the States in talking their willingness to discuss things about stool or?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Okay, my dad was born in Widnes in England, and so I have lots of cousins over there whom I adore. And when Stiff came out, which is my first book, and it is about cadavers and research, you know, sort of post-mortem careers that cadavers have gotten up to. Anyway, I remember my cousin Claire, when the book came out, she said to my other cousin, she said, "Oh, Mary's written a book about cadavers. It's disgusting." That was the last I ever heard from that branch of the family. So it's kind of a, I think I'm looked upon as rather a bizarre and disgusting creature. I mean, that's granted, that's just my cousin Claire, you know, standing in for all of them. That's not fair. But I think there's, I think we in the US are a little quicker to jump into the gutter and say anything, maybe a little bit. I think, so that's just an impression that I have, that we're a little cruder here. In the US, maybe.
I'm just trying to think, you know, who has the most open attitude to this, and yeah, I can't quite sort of, I guess it seems, yeah, so I guess it's sort of evolutionary, isn't it? Like, you know, the sort of disgust to to stool, because we shouldn't touch it and we shouldn't go near it because it's going to sort of make us sick if we do. So I guess
that's called,
yeah, that's one thing we all kind of have in common. Sorry.
That's called coprophobia. I learned that in the book.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
No, it's healthy. It's a healthy avoidance behavior.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. It makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so it is now past 7 o'clock. So I'm afraid we must come to a close. This has been so much fun. I hope you've all had as much fun as we have. Yeah, it's just been so great to talk with all of you. We would love to hear some feedback and thoughts from the audience. The wonderful Penny and Thatcher from the RCPath public engagement team will be sending a short feedback form. It will only take a few minutes to complete, and you will be entered into the draw to win a £20 National Book Token. So you can go buy more of Mary's brilliant books and have plenty to talk about at your next dinner party. Our next book club will be on Monday, the 21st of June, and we'll be featuring The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. We are very excited to announce that Henrietta's family, Jerry and David Lacks, will be chatting with RCPath's VP for Communications, Dr. Sarah Coupland, and an expert panel. The event registration page is now open, and we hope to see you there. One last huge thank you to Mary and our fantastic panelists, Eamon and Genevieve. stay safe, everyone, and good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Eamon.
Bye.
Thanks, Jen.
Bye.
Bye.